In the summer of 1942, two armies collided on the banks of a river called the Volga. What began as a strategic objective soon became a nightmare of rubble. Fire, frost, starvation, and unimaginable brutality. Before it ended, more than 2 million men would fight for a single city and die for it. This is the Battle of Stalingrad, the bloodiest battle in human history, and the moment World War II changed forever. When Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, he believed the Soviet Union would collapse within months. Instead, German armies became trapped in a devastating war of attrition across thousands of miles. But one city, Stalingrad, would become the graveyard. Hitler's dream of conquering the East. Cut. 2. Archival photos, city maps, propaganda posters. After failing to capture Moscow in the winter of 1941, Hitler shifted his military strategy dramatically. Instead of pushing for the Soviet capital again, he ordered Army Group South to strike toward the Caucasus oil fields, the fuel Germany desperately needed to continue the war. But to secure his flank, Hitler insisted another target must be taken, the industrial city on the Volga River that bore the name of his enemy, Stalingrad. A city that wasn't just strategic, it was symbolic. The German Sixth Army, led by General Friedrich Paulus, was ordered to capture the city quickly. No one expected what would follow. Stalingrad in 1942 was a sprawling industrial center, a place of factories, shipyards, workers' districts, and endless rows of brick buildings. It produced tanks, tractors, weapons, ammunition, and supplies vital to the Soviet war effort. But it was also a city full of civilians, more than 500,000 people, living ordinary lives when the thunder of war approached. Archival photos of civilian life. The Soviets knew they could not lose the city. Not only would it cripple their industry, but it would deliver a crushing propaganda victory to Hitler. Stalin issued a clear order. Stalingrad must be held at all costs. By late summer 1942, German forces were approaching Stalingrad from the west. The Luftwaffe launched massive bombing raids that reduced entire districts to ruins. Thousands of civilians were killed in days. But this destruction would ironically become a weapon for the defenders. The rubble created natural fortifications, perfect for snipers, machine gun nests, and ambushes. Ruins of Stalingrad, smoke, rubble. On August 23rd, the German Sixth Army reached the outskirts of Stalingrad. Paulus expected a swift victory. After all, the Wehrmacht had taken hundreds of cities across Europe. But Stalingrad was different. The Soviet 62nd Army under General Vasily Chukov had dug in. Their orders were clear, not one step back. As German infantry pushed into the city, they encountered a form of warfare they had never trained for. Brutal, close-quarters combat. Every building became a fortress. Every floor was a battleground. Machine guns roared from basements. Snipers fired from attics. The Soviet defenders fought room by room, hallway by hallway. The Germans called it Rattenkrieg, rat war. Soldiers fighting among ruins, maps of districts. The fight for Stalingrad had begun, and it would only grow more desperate with each passing day. September 1942. By mid-September, Stalingrad was no longer a city. It was a furnace. A burning skeleton of steel, concrete, ash, and death. The Germans believed they were days away from victory. Hitler had already announced the fall of Stalingrad to the German people. Newspapers printed celebratory headlines. Berlin radio declared that the Red Army had been broken on the Volga. But inside the shattered ruins, the truth was very different. The Soviets had pulled back into their final defensive line. The factory district. 3 industrial giants became the last strongholds of the Red Army. The Red October steel plant, the Barricade gun factory, The massive Dzerzhinsky tractor plant, each factory, was a fortress. Each building was a battlefield within a battlefield. German commanders expected to sweep through quickly. Instead, they walked into a nightmare designed by General Chukov. The Soviets fought from every possible position: boilers, chimneys, machine pits, ruined walls, shattered windows. Every floor, every stairwell, every collapsed ceiling had someone with a rifle waiting to kill. One German sergeant described it as a war inside a steel labyrinth. You never knew if the enemy was above you, below you, or right behind you. In the middle of this industrial hell stood one building, a single apartment block that became a symbol of resistance. Pavlov's house. It was held by Sergeant Yakov Pavlov and just 24 Soviet soldiers. From its upper floors, they had a clear view of the Volga and of German movements. When the Germans tried to take it, Pavlov's men refused to retreat. They mined every entrance. They knocked holes in walls to move between rooms without being seen. They turned each floor into a separate defensive zone. Legend says that when German tanks approached, the defenders destroyed them using anti-tank rifles fired through windows. A German officer later wrote, "We lost more men trying to take Pavlov's house than we did taking some entire cities." For 58 days, Pavlov and his men held the building. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found the Soviet defenders still alive, still firing, and still refusing to give up a single inch of ground. Another weapon now shaped the battle: Soviet snipers. The ruins of Stalingrad created perfect sniper terrain. The most famous among them was Vasily Zaitsev, a hunter from the Ural Mountains. He brought his hunting skills to the battlefield. Between rubble, broken beams, and collapsed train cars, he hunted German officers and machine gun crews. Zaitsev became a legend. His rifle was simple. His accuracy was terrifying. By December, he had over 200 confirmed kills. German morale collapsed in the face of snipers who could appear anywhere. At any moment, the Germans responded with their own elite marksmen. The ruins turned into a silent duel of shadows and death. Not all of Stalingrad's battles were fought for military reasons. Some were symbolic. The grain elevator, a huge concrete silo, had no strategic value. But it was tall, visible, and impossible to ignore. A group of Soviet soldiers, many of them from Central Asia, dug in and refused to surrender. The building caught fire. Smoke and flames poured from its windows. The defenders fought until the heat blistered their skin and their ammunition ran out. When the Germans finally entered, they found only a few survivors still alive, sitting against the walls with empty rifles, refusing to stand down. A German officer wrote, "The Russians defended the grain elevator with a courage we had never seen before." As October turned to November, the German Sixth Army pushed deeper into the city, but they were slowly bleeding out. Ammunition was running low. Food was running low. Winter was coming. Fresh Soviet troops were crossing the Volga every night. The needles of the Russian winter were starting to sting still. Hitler demanded more. Take Stalingrad no matter the cost. General Paulus obeyed. He stretched his lines too thin. He ignored warnings about Soviet troop movements outside the city. He believed the Red Army was collapsing. He did not know that he was marching straight into a trap. While the Germans were trapped in the ruins, the Red Army prepared something massive. In secret, under camouflage nets, at night, hidden from Luftwaffe eyes. The Soviets built up over 1 million men, more than 13,000 guns, 900 tanks, and 1,100 aircraft. This was not a defensive army. This was an encirclement spear. The operation had a name, Operation Uranus. It would strike the German Sixth Army, not in the city, but at its weak, overextended flanks, held by Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian divisions with poor armor and outdated weapons. Stalin wanted Stalingrad saved. But General Zhukov wanted more. He wanted the entire German Sixth Army to die in Stalingrad. By late September 1942, the struggle for Stalingrad had devolved into one of the most brutal urban battles in human history. The city was no longer a city, but a maze of shattered buildings, collapsed roofs, burning metal, and bodies buried beneath ruined stone. German commanders expected Stalingrad to fall within days. Instead, it became a storm of resistance, unlike anything they had imagined. The German Sixth Army soon discovered that fighting in Stalingrad was nothing like the sweeping blitzkrieg victories they enjoyed previously. Tanks were nearly useless among the piles of debris. Artillery strikes only changed the shape of the ruins. Soviets still hid beneath them. The Germans began calling the city Rattenkrieg, the War of the Rats. Soviet soldiers and militia fighters fought from basements, shell holes, chimneys, sewer tunnels destroyed, apartments, and even inside the walls of factories. The front line moved room by room. A single apartment block could cost hundreds of men to capture. A few hours later, another Soviet counterattack would take it back. Perhaps the most famous example of the desperate fighting was Pavlov's house, a simple apartment block, captured by Sergeant Yakov Pavlov and a small group of soldiers, turned into one of the deadliest strongpoints in the entire city. German tanks tried to take it. German infantry tried to storm it. Artillery pounded it day and night. Yet Pavlov's men held for 58 days, surviving on limited supplies, fighting off wave after wave of attacks. One German officer reportedly said, "We captured the building's ground floor." But the Soviets still lived on the roof, north of the city center. The battle grew even more savage. The three massive industrial sites, the Red October factory, the Barricade factory, the tractor factory, became hellish battlegrounds. Soviet workers had produced tanks in these very factories just weeks earlier. Now the same buildings were filled with machine gun nests and sniper teams. German troops would advance into the factory floor, then find Soviet soldiers emerging from pits, trenches dug into factory rubble, and smashed assembly lines. A single factory hall could change hands 10 times in 24 hours. The Germans lost entire battalions in these buildings. But the Soviets kept pouring in reinforcements through the night, ferried across the Volga under constant fire. Crossing the Volga River was a death sentence. German artillery zeroed in on the shoreline. German aircraft bombed the boats each night. Yet every night, Soviet commanders forced themselves to send fresh troops, ammunition, medical supplies, food, and water. Small wooden boats drifted across the Black River, hundreds sinking before reaching the shore. One survivor described the crossing. The river was burning. Pieces of the city fell from the sky like fire. The water itself pasted of smoke and blood. Still, thousands crossed, and thousands died. Stalingrad was fed by courage, desperation, and human sacrifice. As the Germans struggled to gain ground, a new threat emerged: Soviet snipers. The most famous of them, Vasily Zaitsev, a hunter from Siberia who used the ruined city as his hunting ground. Zaitsev and his sniper teams killed hundreds, targeting officers, artillery observers, machine gunners, anyone who dared to expose themselves for a moment. His legend grew so large that the Germans sent one of their best sharpshooters, Major Knig, to eliminate him. The two men engaged in a deadly game of patience inside the ruins. According to Soviet accounts, Zaitsev eventually outsmarted and killed Koenig. Snipers became a symbol of Soviet defiance, ghosts hidden among rubble, draining the German advance inch by inch. By mid-October 1942, the German Sixth Army was exhausted. They had captured most of the city's center. But the Soviet 62nd Army still clung to the western bank of the Volga. General Friedrich Paulus believed victory was close. But the cost was staggering. Entire divisions reduced to skeletons, ammunition shortages, water, contaminated or frozen. Medical facilities overwhelmed, morale collapsing. Yet Hitler demanded Stalingrad must be taken at any cost. Reinforcements were rushed in. More artillery, more men, more tanks. But the Soviets were preparing something larger, something the Germans did not expect. A counterstrike that would change the fate of the entire war. As the fighting raged inside Stalingrad, the Soviet High Command Stavka was assembling two massive armies north and south of the city. The Germans thought the Soviets were nearly defeated. But in reality, the Soviets were preparing one of the largest encirclement operations in history. The weather grew colder. German supply lines stretched thin across hundreds of kilometers. Fuel shortages became serious. Troops lacked winter clothing. Inside the rubble, the Soviets held a narrow strip of land along the river. But outside the city, the Red Army was gathering strength like a rising storm. By the final week of November 1942, the Soviet pincers from the north and south had slammed shut near the town of Kalik. The German Sixth Army, once the pride of Hitler's Eastern Front, was trapped inside the cauldron. 250,000 Axis troops were surrounded. Germans, Romanians, Italians, Croatians, all trapped in an area barely 40 miles across. General Friedrich Paulus sent a message to Hitler. "We are encircled." Hitler's reply was cold and absolute. "The Sixth Army will stand fast. It will not break out." With that single order, the fate of the Sixth Army and the future of the war was sealed. Outside the pocket, Soviet forces immediately began tightening their grip. Artillery rained down. Supply lines vanished. The temperature dropped below minus 25 degrees Celsius. Stalingrad was no longer a battlefield. It was a frozen tomb. Food rations collapsed almost immediately. Soldiers survived on 200 to 300 calories a day. Horse meat became common. Eventually, there were no horses left. Some units ate frozen bread mixed with sawdust. Disease spread. Frostbite, dysentery, typhus, gangrene. Medical supplies ran out. Amputations were done with saws heated over burning scraps of wood. The dead could not be buried. The ground was too frozen. Bodies were stacked outside buildings, used as makeshift walls against the wind. One German soldier wrote in his diary, "We no longer fight for the Führer or for Germany. We fight simply to be alive tomorrow." Supplies came only by air, when they came at all. Göring had promised Hitler that the Luftwaffe could deliver 300 tons a day. They delivered less than 80. Most transport planes were shot down or froze on the ground. Inside Stalingrad. Survival itself became a battle. In December 1942, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein launched Operation Winter Storm, a desperate attempt to rescue the trapped Sixth Army. German relief forces pushed north toward the pocket. They advanced 30, then 40 miles. At one point, they came within 30 miles of Paulus's lines. Paulus radioed Berlin, "We can break out. Give the order." Hitler refused. He insisted that Paulus stay in the city. He insisted Stalingrad must not be abandoned. He insisted victory was still possible, but Manstein's relief troops were exhausted, outnumbered, and frozen. Soviet reinforcements arrived in overwhelming numbers. By late December, the relief offensive stalled. The last hope of escape was gone. On January 10, 1943, the Red Army launched Operation Ring, the final destruction of the Stalingrad pocket. 7,000 Soviet guns opened fire simultaneously. The bombardment shook the frozen earth. Whole streets collapsed into dust. The German lines shattered immediately. Every day the pocket shrank. 200 square miles gives 150 gives. 100 gives 50 gives 20. By January 20th, the Sixth Army was split into two halves. Paulus and his staff hid in the basement of the department store, Univermag. Around them, the city burned. The men could no longer even carry rifles. Some units had fewer than 10 bullets left. Others had none. One soldier wrote, "We do not fear death anymore. We fear freezing before we die." On January 30th, Hitler promoted Paulus to Field Marshal, the highest rank in the German army. Hitler expected Paulus to commit suicide. No German field marshal had ever been captured alive. Paulus refused. On January 31st, 1943, Soviet troops reached the Univermag building. Paulus surrendered. 2 days later, the northern pocket surrendered as well. The battle was over. Result: over 2 million casualties. 250,000 Axis troops trapped. Only approximately 5,000 ever returned home from Soviet captivity. Stalingrad became the turning point of the entire war. The German army would never recover. The Soviet Union would push west slowly, brutally, relentlessly, until they reached Berlin in 1945.